BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Alright, hello everybody. Today is Wednesday. Time for the AMA. Welcome to the show. This is the day where I respond to your questions and comments. We go through them together and have a discussion. We're going to go to the Zodiac Killer in just a second, but first I would like to begin with one from Playtime talking about the disappearance of Madeline McCann. Madeline McCann was born on the 12th of May, 2003, 18 years ago. She disappeared sometime before May 3rd, 2007, according to the careful examination to the timeline by private investigator Richard Hall. And yes, it is the month of May now, Madeline McCann. If she is still alive, she should be 18 years old very soon after the time of this recording coming out. But as far as being alive and talking about the timeline, I've said it once, and I've said it again, to anybody who is thinking of the accidental death theory, or that Madeline McCann was murdered by her parents, or murdered by anybody, or that she died in the apartment on the night that she disappeared back in 2007, you will not get the timeline right. I will make that bold proclamation one more time. You will not get the timeline right because there is some type of inaccuracy or assumption, or you have to start fudging the facts a little bit to make this work. And for the longest time, I thought that Madeline McCann had died in the apartment. I was completely pulled into this whole thing about the cadaver dogs, and that the parents were giving her sleep aid drugs as well as to the other two twins, and that they had this whole system of just, we're not going to use the night crash at the resort in Praia de Luz, Portugal. We're just going to give our kids some sleep aid drugs. They'll just knock them out for the night, and then they came back, and they found Madeline dead. That theory is a little bit evolutionary because Gonçalo Amaral, the lead detective in Portugal, I'm sure you've seen him on some of the documentaries. He even did one himself. He did like a media presentation in Portuguese, but it has subtitles, talking about his theory was that Madeline died accidentally in the apartment. Perhaps she was given sleep aid drugs, but then she climbed up onto a couch and then she fell forward, hit her head on a ledge or a very extended windowsill, and then they found her dead in the apartment, and then the parents covered it up because if she had been under the influence of sleep aid drugs, they could have been charged with who knows what kind of crime. But the problem is, though, Gonçalo Amaral's next step was to say, well, maybe they hid her body in a freezer for a while. And I'm like, how on earth do you know that? I mean, what kind of commercial industrial freezer are you talking about? And these are the issues that you get into when you start pushing the accidental death theory or some type of murder, that Madeline was indeed murdered. The whole angle of Jerry McCann thought Madeline wasn't really his daughter, so he had her murdered. You have to start making some type of assumption. So I've had a big reversal on Madeline McCann, and I went over the timeline so many times, and I was like, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work to get Madeline dying on that night and actually having all of these things that are in the conventional narrative. Now, when it comes to the general public, sometimes the conventional narrative is incorrect, or that the things that we get in the documentaries and in the articles and in the news reports can be misleading, or, I mean, the police even try and protect some of their information. It's privileged information. That's not a ridiculous concept. That is something that definitely happens. But based on what we know now, to have Madeline die in the apartment and get her body moved to some type of dump site, whether she was buried at the beach temporarily or hidden in an industrial freezer like the way Gonzalo Amaral may have said, then you have to start making these types of assumptions because the people who are there are well, it's the whole it's not, I think it goes back to what Jimmy Nine Lives said when he's like, killing a person is easy, but what do you do with the body? That's the difficult thing. And in the case of Madeline McCann, it's just like that. I mean, you could explain, yeah, okay, she died in the apartment. Well, then what happened to her body in the timeline that has been provided on the 3rd of May 2007 in Praia de Luz, Portugal, and you have to start making assumptions or fudging the facts. Okay, but I said that we were going to do some questions about the Zodiac killer. So I'm going to go and begin with one that comes to us from James Whoever, who said, this episode, and this is actually on the episode that came out last Monday for Zodiac Mondays, The Murder of Paul Stine, and it says, this episode did open up a couple of questions that I had never considered. So this is going to be somewhat similar to the Paul Stine material, but James has put the questions into the comments section right here. Why did he, all of a sudden, start taking proof items from the people? Okay, why he of course means the Zodiac Killer. After the murder of Paul Stine, the Zodiac Killer took Paul Stine's wallet, Paul Stine's keys, and a piece of Paul Stine's bloody shirt. Why would the Zodiac Killer deviate from this pattern? Paul Stine was the final confirmed Zodiac Killer victim. He was murdered on October 11th of 1969, and after the murder of Paul Stine, the Zodiac Killer would never again go about crimes in the same way. If, and this is a big if, the Zodiac continued to commit murders, then he didn't write in letters saying, I will state some facts that only I and the police know. He didn't send in a piece of anyone's bloody shirt or something like that. Instead, the murder of Paul Stine is the only time that the Zodiac Killer stole items from the victims. It's also perhaps the only time that the Zodiac moved one of the victims after they were dead. That is another thing that the Zodiac Killer really did not do, not at Lake Herman Road and not at Blue Rock Springs. But by the time you get to Lake Berryessa is different because both of the victims survived the stabbing, and then one of them passed away 2 days later in the hospital, Cecilia Shepard. But Brian Hartnell went on to survive, and he is still alive to this day. So you have the Zodiac Killer in the taxi cab where Paul Stine is shot, and he's moving the body around and taking these items, cutting off a piece of Paul Stine's shirt. Very, very different behavior. Number one, some people think that the Lake Berryessa stabbing that had occurred 2 weeks before was a copycat, and that wasn't the real Zodiac Killer. That's one possibility to answer the question, why steal items? So then you would have somebody trying to prove, hey, look, this is really me. I'm the person who actually committed this crime. And I always go back and forth on that one. I tend to lean toward Lake Berryessa being genuine Zodiac activity, but there are always some questions that stand out to me, and I get curious about some of these alternative theories. But why take the items? Number two, it could be paying homage to Jack the Ripper or some influences from Jack the Ripper, because in that Paul Stine Q&A that I did on Monday, I said that something that I had learned about the murder of Catherine Eddowes back in 1888 was that a piece of her skirt was cut off by the Ripper and taken. So then cutting off a piece of Paul Stine's shirt, that could have been something there. But I'll go on to the next question because I wanted to begin the AMA with this list of questions that James Whoever has written out. Why switch up the methods of operation to throw off the police and tell them he's the same person? Oh, that is the biggest question in the entire Zodiac Killer mystery, except for possibly who was the Zodiac Killer. Why switch these things up? And this is another reiteration, but the first is that the Zodiac was targeting couples in cars late at night on lovers' lanes. Then he wants to deviate from that by attacking a couple during the daytime wearing the hooded costume, because people are going to have their guard out for lovers' lanes at night. The police could be patrolling lovers' lanes at night, or they could be at least patrolling secluded areas and looking on the lookout after dark. They only think that he is going to operate after dark. And even once on the channel, I read that when the Zodiac killer talked about wiping out a school bus of children and the Zodiac talked about the bus bomb, the police took those threats seriously, but they didn't actually think that the Zodiac killer was going to act on that because the Zodiac had never done anything like that before. But another point that I heard, and I think this one was from the Zodiac Speaking podcast, and this is some new stuff that I didn't mention on Monday, is that why change the MO at Lake Berryessa? And that could be that after the first two Zodiac crimes, those occurred at night, and the Zodiac wanted to commit a crime in the daytime, but he's wearing the all-black costume. Many people think that this is the executioner's hood from that the Lake Berryessa costume is a tribute to the executioner's hood from the Mikado, the Lord High Executioner. But I think it was on Zodiac Speaking when they said that it's also like he's bringing the darkness onto him, and he's using this as a disguise, whereas when he goes out at night, he didn't wear a mask because he had the darkness to conceal his identity, and during the daytime, he's also using the darkness to conceal his identity. And I don't think that's a far-out statement, because Michael Cole even wrote this in his book Zodiac Revisited Volume 3, when he said that the first crime occurred on December 20th of 1968, the murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. Then you have this whole gap until the winter. It's almost like the Zodiac killer went dormant for the winter and in the spring, really. The Zodiac only operated in the summer and in the fall. But what's after December 20th? The winter solstice. And is it possible that the Zodiac killer was expecting that the bodies of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen would have been found on the winter solstice, the darkest day of the year, as well as talking about putting the Radians on top of Mount Diablo? The Zodiac is putting himself on top of Devil's Mountain. So the darkest day of the year, Devil's Mountain, using the darkness as a cloak. He is the epitome of darkness, epitome of evil. I think you can get the idea, and I don't think those are outrageous comments. Even if they aren't intentional, they could all be embedded in the psychology of the Zodiac killer. But big thank you to James Whoever. And if you haven't heard that full episode in its entirety, I would highly recommend it that you listen to the Murder of Paul Stine Q&A session that came out last Monday. One more comment from that is Albert Forel says, the Stine shooting is a real mind fudge. The more you think about it, the crazier it gets. Why? And why is spelled with 4 Ys. Absolutely, absolutely. I just thought it was utterly shocking and perplexing when I learned all this stuff for the first time. The Lake Berryessa stabbing and the murder of Paul Stine. Those are the things that just are so odd and perplexing because there's no need to do this. Even if you're going to look at somebody who wants to create a criminal masterpiece filled with mathematical signatures, you don't have to dress up in a costume and commit a crime during the daytime if you only operate at night. If you want to create a criminal masterpiece filled with mathematical signatures, you don't have to murder a taxi driver when previously you've only attacked couples who are on either lovers' lanes or they're on a date or they're in a car somewhere in a secluded area, because some people debate to this day that Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs were not lovers' lane killings. Whatever. There's a man and a woman in a car. In a boy or girl, if you're going to look at David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, who were just teenagers, they're alone in a car, or Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard drove out to Lake Berryessa. They're about actually 500 yards from their car at the most during the time of the Lake Berryessa stabbing. Then somebody is going to rob Paul Stine and murder him. I say rob because the wallet and the keys were stolen. It's so weird. The more you think about it, it's like, why would this person risk all of this just to kill a taxi driver? Why would this person put himself at such a great in such harm's way just to murder someone who is completely different from all the previous killings? And one of the big answers to that question is that it could have been about the location, not the victim. That could have been the reason for the deviation. He wanted it to match up to something mathematical. Also, Paul Stine could have been targeted because he had knowledge of something to do with the Zodiac killer's identity. I mean, there could be numerous explanations about why Paul Stein, a taxi driver, was murdered, but I do completely agree that if it weren't for the letters and the piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt, people would not have thought twice about Paul Stein as uh, the murder of Paul Stein in the future. I mean, people wouldn't have connected him to the Zodiac killer. They would have just said that this guy is a taxi driver that got robbed. Moving on to a comment that is on a different episode. This one is a little bit older, but it comes to us from Toby Two Toes, who says, there is something that has been found in the 408 cipher. The words EBE, ORIETEM, ETHHPITI is from the Afrikaans language. It was taken from a Bible verse that has been known to have a demonic connection. All right, well, I do thank you for the comment all the same. And this one came out on the older episode, um, Zodiac Killer 408 Cipher discussion. So, is this from the Afrikaans language? That final line of the 408 cipher, some people call it the Z18 cipher. Is this something that, is this the answer? It's not in English, it's in Afrikaans. So I sent this to two South Africans who are both Afrikaners. Afrikaans is their mother tongue, and they both said a flat out no. Well, I do appreciate this type of thinking. They were like, that is not Afrikaans. It just looks like gibberish. They didn't recognize a single word in this. Eba orea tem ete chepaite. Okay, I'm sure that sounds like Afrikaans the few times that I've heard them talking in Afrikaans, but they denied this enthusiastically, so I have to side with them. Okay, on to the next comment. The next one comes to us from Steph at Studio Steph, who says something about Donald Lee Booyak and the murder of Otto Fawson. That's the title of the episode, but you'll see these comments are just about Booyak as a Zodiac killer suspect. He is so very suspicious. Appearance, age, demeanor, abnormal psychology, background, fits to a T. It's 15 hours from Deer Lodge to Vallejo. Easy for a car thief. If the guess of a Zodiac killer claiming to be from Deer Lodge is accurate, I'm curious, how did he end up on Lake Herman Road? And wouldn't he want to rob them? I'm assuming he had no money. Alright, these are all good questions. I mean, all of these things here. And I've reached out to Kevin Robert Brooks, and perhaps we will do some collaboration in the future. Kevin Robert Brooks is the perhaps most famous person who thinks that Donald Lee Booyak was the Zodiac killer. And I do agree that these things like age, appearance, demeanor, abnormal psychology, all of that stuff seems to match up with Donald Lee Booyak. The biggest challenge is, did he have the intellectual capacity to create all of the mathematical intricacies in the Zodiac Killer mystery? But I would like to actually tackle the subject in a different way. It's a 15-hour drive from Deer Lodge to Vallejo. Donald Lee Booyak not only has a Montana connection to the Zodiac Killer mystery, because the Zodiac did say that he spent time in Deer Lodge Prison in Montana, allegedly, at Lake Berryessa. So, that's one thing, but Booyak also served in the military in California. Some things do match up, but what I would much rather know is about this Lake Herman Road incident on December 20th of 1968. Where is the hard evidence that Donald Lee Booyak was in the state of California at all in December of 1968? He's released from prison on December 17th, I think, 1968. He served 11 years of a life sentence for the murder of Otto Fawson that we just cited in the title. He gets out. 3 days later, there's the Lake Herman Road shooting. And if you are going to say that Donald Lee Booyak was the Zodiac killer, you would have to think that he must have been in prison just stewing in his own emotion, thinking about how he is either going to get revenge on society or the world. But from the things that I've read from Kevin Robert Brooks on forums, it seems also that he may have interacted with Ed Edwards in prison, and he wanted to do this to prove to himself that he could prove to Ed Edwards, and I do mean that literally, prove to himself that he could prove this to Ed Edwards, that he could commit this type of crime and get away with it. But I'll just throw around a bigger challenge that isn't so speculative. Where is the hard evidence that puts Donald Lee Booyak in the state of California. Not on Lake Herman Road, no. Not on Blue Rock Springs on July 4th. Not at Lake Berryessa on September 27th. In the entire state of California on those exact dates and times. I mean, if there was anything like some type of scrap of paper where he signed his name on something, and I'm sure the people who think that Donald Lee Booyock was the Zodiac killer would say, well, he drove in and he drove out. Maybe I can answer one of these questions about did he go there as a car thief? I think that Kevin Robert Brooks has dug up the fact that Booyock may have had access to two different vehicles, which were owned privately, I believe even prior to him going into prison. But I mean, they still stayed in the family. But I don't want to talk about some things that I'm not 100% certain of because I might get the details wrong. But in short, I don't think he would have had to have stolen a car. I think he had one in his possession, or at his disposal, rather, and that is how he made the drive from Montana down to Lake Herman Road. But that begs the question, someone gets out of prison after 11 years, and that's the first thing that they're going to do, drive to California, commit two murders, and then drive back to Montana? That is some ridiculous stuff. You would have to be one ridiculous individual to live your life that way. But let's see. Okay. Thank you so much to everyone who has listened to part one of this AMA. And please stay tuned because we will be right back for some more questions and comments, talking about some more true crime cases. So please stay tuned and back after this.
You are listening to Black Box Online Radio.
This show is brought to you by TeeSpring. Feel free to check out the merchandise. Almost all sizes and colors are listed.
Black Box Online Radio.
And remember YouTube Premium. You can download the show, take it on the go, anywhere and anyhow.
Please like and subscribe. Grazie mille.
Okay, hello everybody, and we are back. Moving on with the AMA, I would like to talk about the murder of Joan Webster from 1981. On the weekends, there has been a bonus segment that has been regularly coming out about the murder of Joan Webster. I correspond regularly with Eve Carson, who was the sister-in-law of Joan, and she wrote the book Mommy's a Mole, Whale of a Tale, talking about Joan Webster and her parents' connection to the CIA. That's Joan Webster's parents, George and Eleanor Webster. I also got in touch with the assistant district attorney who wrote the book The Paradiso Files. His name is Tim Burke, and I wanted him to also be a contributor. He only provided me with one comment, one statement on the case that I read off last week. But throughout the discussions, there was something in the murder of Joan Webster that I just realized. She was murdered in 1981 after leaving Logan Airport in Boston, Massachusetts. Her remains were discovered in 1990, and it was determined that Joan Webster had died from blunt force trauma. Now, Joe from the Zodiac Killer Insight series brought up the very good point that, 8.5 years until she was discovered, she had been buried in the ground, her body had been placed in a trash bag, so they weren't completely sure if there had been some other type of activity. Talking about things like maybe stabbed in some way. And the reason I bring this up is not because of a stabbing, but it deals with a certain individual named Robert Bond. Robert Bond was a jailhouse informant who began to share some things about how he was talking to the person who was accused of Joan Webster's murder in prison, Leonard Paradiso, the authorities' prime suspect in her murder. And he talked about two possibilities about how Joan Webster could have been murdered: strangled or struck with a whiskey bottle. And that's a nutshell version. If you'd like to hear a full extended presentation, there is an episode on this channel called The Murder of Joan Webster, Authorities 100% Debunked, and it's a little bit more extensive. It's also been made into a playlist. There are numerous episodes about the murder of Joan Webster. But then I began to get curious about it because I had always expected that when Eve Carson has shared with me that the detectives knew the manner of Joan Webster's death more than 7 years prior, to the discovery of her remains. I had always assumed that Joan Webster was killed with blunt force trauma and that she had been struck with a whiskey bottle, but I decided to ask Eve Carson about that, and she has provided me with this response here. I do not believe the blunt instrument was a whiskey bottle. First, the injury is too extensive. I don't think that you could do that with a whiskey bottle. I spoke with a Hamilton detective who was involved with the recovery. He felt that it was something like a bat or a heavy limb, maybe even a tire iron. The physics to inflict that kind of blow required an enormous amount of force and torque. And what you're looking at now is the skull of Joan Webster that was recovered from a place near Tobacco Road in 1990, just to the northeast of Boston, Massachusetts. I'll just continue with Eve Carson's comment here. During the Bond interview on January 14th, 1983, Bond describes the pictures of Leonard Paradiso's boat tacked up on his cell. An interior shot shows some liquor bottles on the shelf. Bond got the registration number from the photos. When the boat was recovered, there were no glass shards or liquor bottles found on the boat. Paradiso and his girlfriend had stripped the boat when they sank it on July 26, 1981, in an insurance fraud scheme. Burke and Palumbo, Tim Burke is the prosecutor in the trial, and Andrew Palumbo is a state trooper, both made false representations that there were glass shards found on the boat. So you can see what Eve Carson's trying to say. She doesn't believe any of this story about Joan being struck with a whiskey bottle. In fact, she says a bat, maybe even a tire iron. I think that it's good to get some clarity on that. And just one more thing that I'll put into this comment here. The reason why Robert Bond has such an invested interest in this is because there was a $50,000 reward at the time for information that could lead to the recovery of Joan Webster. And Robert Bond, this jailhouse informant, thought that he could have obtained that. If you'd like to hear more about this, you can tune into the episodes on the weekend about the murder of Joan Webster. But the reason why I wanted to read off this comment from Eve Carson now is because the next one that we're going to do is going to focus on a murder that is connected to Joan Webster's case, and it's the 1979 murder of Maria Iannuzzi. There'll be a very extended presentation on that. The authorities, meaning the police and the district attorney, insisted that it was the same person that murdered both of them, Leonard Paradiso. It's all laid out in the book, The Paradiso Files by Tim Burke. But is that really what happened? Well, I mean, I would invite you guys to be the judge, have a listen to the Joan Webster and Maria Iannuzzi episodes here on this channel, and I did learn about them because of the Zodiac Killer, particularly through the book Time 17, written by Gareth Penn. Moving on to our next comment. This one came in on the episode Interrogation, the Murder of Dorka Lisker, and it comes to us from Classic Chevy Cat, who wanted to say something about the police and the authorities and their hardest piece of evidence against a man named Bruce Lisker in the murder of his mother, Dorka. This occurred back in 1983, and this case was featured on 48 Hours, but it was also turned into a dramatized show on Paramount Plus called Interrogation. All of the names are fictional in the show Interrogation. I do highly recommend it, though. But their biggest piece of evidence was that there's this guy, Bruce Lisker. He's driving to his mother's house. He knocks on the door. Nobody answers. So he goes to a side window and he peers in and he sees what appears to be his mother's feet on the floor. He sees her laying on the floor. So then he goes to the dining room window to get a better look. And then he sees that, yes, indeed, his mother is on the floor. Now he can see a much larger portion of her body. So then he gets in through a window and finds that she has been stabbed with 2 knives in the back of her body, and the knives are actually still in her when Bruce Lisker is able to arrive. But the authorities had their biggest piece of evidence against him, saying that on a day as sunny as it was back in March of 1983, that he could not have seen through the window because of the glare. And the detective in that one, Andrew Mansu, whose fictional name in the TV show is Dave Russell, took a photo where he took a photo in front of the window in question, and sure, you can see glare, and it reflects. Classic Chevy Cat wanted to respond to that. Very interesting case, never heard of this one. A few things, Ned. The claim of the window glare made me cringe, like you said. You place your face against the glass, Shield the sides with your hands, and there you go. With that being said, is it possible that the son or Mike alone asked Dorka Lisker for money, and when she refused, the requester flew into a rage? Now, I'm going to respond to that second part in a second, but the reason why I wanted to zone in on this comment was absolutely you can see through a window, unless it's something like that is a complete mirror that has like the one-way mirror side where one is something that is 100% reflective, but that's not what happened. And I've been paying a lot more attention to the glare on windows after watching the stuff Interrogation, 48 Hours, learning about the story of Bruce Lisker and his mother Dorka Lisker. And when I look at windows now, and I can see the glare, even if there is an intense reflection, you can still see through it, even if you're 100 yards away. I would invite any of you to do this. Like, look at a building across the street or something. You might be able to see something. There'll be a very intense glare. You might not be able to see everything through the window, but 90% of the time, you can still make out images. And bear in mind that Bruce Lisker would have only needed to have seen his mother's feet on the floor to have known that she was laying down in an incapacitated state. But the suspect that Classic Chevy Cat was just about to talk about, other than Bruce Lisker, is an individual named John Michael Ryan, often referred to as Mike Ryan. And one thing that was heavily discussed in the show Interrogation is that this could have been a robbery attempt where someone knew that Dorka Lisker had $150 on her, which was her weekly grocery money, and that's what the ambition of breaking into her home was all about. I'll get back to the comment here. With that said, it's possible that the son or Mike Ryan alone asked Dorka for money, and when she refused, the requester flew into rage. Below Mike's photo in your presentation, it says that he committed suicide. I'd like to know when that was. Could that have been due to guilt? Please don't pull knives out of a person who has been impaled. Wait for medical help. Yikes. Great show, Ned. I would like to hear what the son is saying. If I remember to, will visit his website. And yes, he has a website, brucelisker.com. I did respond, though, to that comment right here, that the suicide was in 1996, 13 years after Dorka Lisker was murdered. But this is something that I thought about when I was watching the show Interrogation, which is, they did follow the true events pretty closely. Bruce Lisker got into his mother's home through the window, and she has 2 knives in her back, and he pulled them out of her because he thought it would help her breathe. But just as I was watching that on TV, I was like, oh no, I mean, firstly, that's not going to help. I mean, you're supposed to leave the blade in and wait for the authorities, just as Classic Chevy Cat said. But also, he's going to have his forensic material all over everything. Fingerprints, maybe a hair's going to fall out, sweat, footprints right near the body. I mean, everything is going to be contaminated. Now, if I can differentiate between the two people, there's this dramatization that they did in the show Interrogation, and then there's the true story of Bruce Lisker and Dorka Lisker. I would have to say that the fictional show gives me a lot of reasonable doubt, and I would invite you to listen to the whole episode, but I will share one thing that I heard a quotation from John Lorden, who does the show Brain Scratch, in his episode on the murder of Maria Ridulph, where he said, I don't know how, I can't tell you why, but there's just something about it that tells me their suspect is guilty. Something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that's the way I felt watching the show Interrogation. And if I have to look at the true story of Bruce Lisker, I don't think he should have spent a day in jail. He spent 26 years in jail for the murder of his mother, Dorka Lisker, and he was released in 2009. He should not have spent a single day in jail, because no matter what, his rights were definitely violated at some point, whether it was the detective Andrew Monsu, or it was through some other manner in the legal proceedings, and you have the right to a fair trial. But I mean, you still do get those questions that even if someone is not the murderer, an active participant in some way, maybe being the lookout while someone is stealing the money, but that's more about the fictional recreation that they put forward in the show Interrogation. Anybody can watch that on Paramount Plus. And I thank Chevy Cat for the comment. Moving on to our next topic, we have The Ghost of Highway 20, which talks all about the serial killer John Arthur Ackroyd and his victims. Now, this is one that I would like to begin with. Super Strike 9 says, good documentary, that's referring to Ghost of Highway 20. I wasn't familiar with the case before I saw the documentary, and I wasn't either. Once again, thank you to Mr. JSV650 who requested last week's Anything Goes topic, and if anybody has any ideas for a future episode, you can put them in the comments section below, although I do confess the topic list is getting rather big. But yeah, I had never heard of it until about 2 weeks ago, the serial killer John Ackroyd and the murders that took place along Highway 20 in Oregon. Now, the first comment that I would like to look at is from Walter, who says, Tom Voigt lives in Oregon. I wonder if he has heard of this. I'm not going to lie to you, Walter. I was also wondering if Tom Voigt had something to say about John Ackroyd and the ghost of Highway 20, because Tom Voigt is also very familiar with Ted Bundy as well as the Green River Killer, and he actually has some intense history investigating the Green River Killer, but of course the Green River Killer has already been caught, unlike the Zodiac Killer, and we know who he was, Gary Ridgway. The show Murder Made Me Famous is a podcast that I found on podcast1.com, and I only saw one episode, or listened to one episode. A podcast is pure audio, and I just really didn't like the title Murder Made Me Famous. I felt it was glorifying the serial killers a little bit too much. The only episode from them I ever listened to was about Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, and the way they described him is that he was a man who wasn't very smart, who wasn't good at a lot of things. In fact, maybe the only thing that he was good at was committing murders. And that's absolutely disgusting, but it's probably true. The next comment comes to us from Dale Anderson, who says something about the serial killer John Ackroyd. I loved his brother Dan in Ghostbusters. And Dale Anderson, I'm not going to lie to you. I know I shouldn't be humorous thinking about murder stories and serial killers. The whole time I was watching The Ghost of Highway 20 and doing the episode on John Arthur Ackroyd, I was thinking about Dan Aykroyd the whole time, whether it's Ghostbusters, the Blues Brothers, or even My Girl. I was thinking about it the whole time. It's like, just imagine just something like anything that Dan Aykroyd has ever said in the movie, like "Ride 'em in rawhide," and the music can just start playing in the background. I was definitely thinking that too, so I will give you that one. And lastly, I would like to conclude with just one more comment about the murder of Joan Webster in this segment. The first one I read off came from an email that Eve Carson had sent me, and anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. But this is also from Classic Chevy Cat, who says, I'm going to have to listen to this episode on Joan Webster again. There's a heck of a lot here. My mind is back to Logan Airport when she disappeared in 1981. Why would a classy lady get into a car with a Ted Kaczynski look-alike? And you can see the sketch of the bearded man that was luring Joan Webster to his car. I think he looks a lot more like Gareth Penn than Ted Kaczynski, but that's just me. Was the car a ride alternative to taxis? If it was planned, did this bearded man know her name and claim that he was sent by someone Joan knew to pick her up? Maybe he had a gun. Also, did the police interview everyone on the flight Joan was on? As far as Bond is concerned, that's Robert Bond, the jailhouse informant, I think Ralph Spinelli is more believable. What a case. It's hard for me to follow as I have not heard or read anything about it. Relying on you, Ned, and not only me, but Eve Carson also provides a lot of the material for the episodes on the murder of Joan Webster. Okay, though, first question. Why would somebody like Joan Webster get into a car with some Ted Kaczynski look-alike who maybe was responsible for her death? And I say maybe because people aren't even sure that that bearded man was the murderer of Joan Webster. He may have just driven her somewhere and she was in a vulnerable place and got murdered. This is an unsolved case. I mean, firstly, though, her death has been attributed to the serial killer Leonard Paradiso, who died in prison for the murder of Marie Iannuzzi, which we'll talk about on Sunday. But why would she get into his car? Well, this goes right back to the serial killer, John Arthur Ackroyd, because in that documentary, The Ghost of Highway 20, they talked about his method of attacking victims. Like, he lured a woman into his car, and she was one of the survivors, and she was able to give her own testimonial. And she said, he offered me a ride. He didn't seem dangerous at all. He didn't seem suspicious at all. It's the whole concept of you would accept a ride from this person when you wouldn't accept a ride from somebody else otherwise, putting them in a completely safe frame of mind. They think this person is not dangerous, this person is very manipulative, perhaps even psychopathic or sociopathic. They seem like they're cool and calm as a cucumber, but in reality they're just using this person as a target to unleash their deeply hidden rage that comes out at calculated intervals. Alright, so that could be one way that she would get into the car. And the next question here, though, was the car a ride alternative to taxis? As far as I know, yes, it was. That's why the district attorney's office created this narrative that Leonard Paradiso must have been operating an illegal taxi, and that Paradiso was somewhat of a thug, more or less. He was a lowlife. He was involved with all sorts of crimes. The insurance fraud that we mentioned, sinking his boat on the 26th of July, 1981, as well as other crimes such as rape. And he was an undesirable, unsavory individual, and it's possible that he murdered Joan Webster while operating this illegal taxi, in their theory, not mine, but that's what the authorities presented. Was the car an alternative to taxis? I mean, you could imagine somebody is just going to come over, hey, they're going to charge you $50 to go wherever you want to go, I'll do it for 20, and someone makes a spur-of-the-moment decision. I mean, maybe. I mean, those things do happen, and women do get abducted that way. And I always have to go back to the case of Zhang Yingying, the Chinese international student who was abducted by somebody whom she didn't even know. It's all on videotape, and that was in the Midwest. That took place in 2017, where some guy just pulls up and he sees her waiting, and he's like, hey, do you need a ride? And she says, oh yes, I'm running late for an appointment, thank you so much. She gets into his car, and he murders her. He had no idea who she was. She had no idea who he was. And for the longest time in the murder of Zhang Yingying, the authorities thought that she must have known the guy because she got into his car so easily. It's that exact same setup. Making people feel at ease, making people feel like you're not dangerous, creating this false sense of security. And the next one is, if it is planned, did this bearded man know her name and claim to be sent by someone Joan knew to pick her up? This gets completely away from the Leonard Paradiso serial killer angle and the alternative theories that Eve Carson truly likes to explore. Number one, it's possible that the bearded man was Joan Webster's own father, George. That's something that Eve Carson has shared with me. She thinks that it's possible that he could have been the man who had abducted Joan. Or something that I've thought about, that I'm sure anyone who would look into the case, even Chevy Cat has thought about this, saying that they're pretending to be a family friend. Hey, you must be Joan. Yeah, your father George sent me to pick you up. Your mother Terry sent me to pick you up. Just saying something like that, like, oh, really? Yeah, we're going right over to the Thanksgiving after party or something like that. And then she gets into the car once again under the presumption that this person is not dangerous. Okay, but on to the next one was maybe he had a gun. Also, did the police interview everyone on the flight that Joan was on? That one I do not know the answer to, but I think that I will read off one comment that Eve Carson has left on the episode in response to Classic Chevy Cat Black. The bearded man with her caused a fuss over a heavy bag and said to Joan, we don't have to take this cab. He maneuvered her to another car. She would not have changed cars with someone she did not know and trust. And Eve Carson is saying this is someone who knew Joan personally. That indicates a second culprit, the driver of the second car. Authorities conducted extensive interviews. They spoke to passengers on Joan's flight as well as travelers on flights arriving around the same time. Joan traveled alone. The bearded man caught up with her in the cab line. All right, so you can see how they met, and yes, the other people on the plane were mentioned. Now, the last one was, as far as Bond is concerned, I believe Spinelli even more. Well, Robert Bond doesn't seem to be a very reliable jailhouse informant. In short, he was all in it for himself. That was definitely true. But I simply wanted to know, was he coming from a place of accuracy or a place of coached inaccuracy? Alright, well, that's all for me now in this segment. Please stay tuned because we will be back for something larger, something more expansive and more extensive. This episode is not over yet, so please stay tuned. And thank you to everybody who has left comments on all of these episodes, the murder of Dorka Lisker, the murder of Joan Webster, and all the other cases that are on this channel. Please stay tuned, right, and we'll be back right after this. Bum ba bum 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 ba bum 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 ba bum bum bum. At this time, I would like to remind everybody about YouTube Premium. If you use the YouTube Premium features, you can download Black Box Online Radio, take it on the go, out walking, in the car, anywhere and anyhow. YouTube Premium also gives you access to special YouTube original shows and YouTube music. And now, let's get back to the episode. Okay, hello everybody, and we are back. This segment is definitely going to be very free-form. Going to be dealing with some things all up and down and all across the spectrum. But it is an AMA and Ask Me Anything, so let's get right to it. Our first question comes to us from Jacob Wilbers, who says, LOL, got the Asian girl reading your Instagram. I see a theme. Why don't you talk about your time living in Asia? I heard you mention this before. CCP plant? ? JK. And no, Chinese Communist Party? Absolutely not. They do some terrible things. No, but I did live in China for 6 years, and it's all a giant blur, to be honest. And not because I was on drugs or anything, I wasn't. It feels like kind of out of this world even to this day now that it's over. It's like, was I really in China for 6 years? But the first time I went to Asia was actually just visiting in 2013. I went to the city of Vladivostok in Russia, and most people would never think about Russia when it comes to Asia immediately, but yeah, I went to visit that city. It's a really, really mix of Chinese, Korean, and Russian things all at the same time in Vladivostok. But in 2013, I also went to the city of Guangzhou in China. I got a job as an English teacher there, just got it on the internet, and I arrived in Guangzhou. And I was in Guangzhou for about 6 months. I spent 2 years teaching English in Beijing. Then I went to a city called Zhuhai in the far south of China, like right on the coast. And I was in Zhuhai for about 3 years. And I spent my last 2.5 months in China in a place called Nanchang, which is in Jiangxi province. China is so unbelievably different than America. Like, the laws there are not made to protect you. They're simply just about controlling 1 billion people. And many people who are administrators, managers, security guards, police officers, they're not even there to protect you. They're just there so they don't get in trouble. They want to earn their money, and they want to stay out of trouble. They're only looking out for themselves. Not all, but very frequently you encounter that. When I was in China, I was talking with somebody in America, and they asked me, is it true that people in China are really smart? And the way I responded was by saying that China has 3 times the population of America. And I was actually mistaken at the time. It's more like 4 times the population of America. But let's just use that true example. 4 times as the population. That means there are 4 times as many smart people and 4 times as many dumb people as America. Think of everything as just being magnified. Everything is going to be times 4. There are 4 times as many nice people and 4 times as many mean people, ignorant people, open-minded people, angry people, calm people. everything is just more. And when you have 1 billion people in a country, you're just going to be encountering all kinds of different people on the streets, and you never know who you're going to experience. And of course, you're going to have some different types of encounters in Asia. Like you're going to be walking down the street and you get hit in the face with octopus juice. I mean, yeah, that can happen because some guys like cooking and doing silly things with an octopus. Or maybe you'll be trying to walk down a street, but you can't because it's filled with corn and there's just corn everywhere. You will encounter things that you really don't think about too much. Going into the countryside in China is exactly the way foreigners describe it. Like, people think that you're a celebrity. They come up to you, they just want to shake your hand, they want to be in photos with you. And it's not so much about maintaining any type of friendship. They're purely using you as something to gawk at. And yeah, people will come up to you and they will be like, "Hey, you're like white. Do you have a big penis?" And that happens more than once. I mean, somewhat frequently, especially like when you're around people who've had a little bit to drink. I think you can imagine, but they do say things like that. So that's what a horrible note to end on during talking about Asia, but yeah, that sums it up. Moving on to the next set of questions, I put out a message on YouTube. I did like a 3-minute promo for today's AMA, and I gathered a lot of your questions here that you guys wrote in. By the way, big thank you to everybody who listened to that and who has hit the like button, subscribed, anyone who has bought a t-shirt and shared the show with people, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter, anyone who is doing anything of the sort. You guys are absolutely awesome. And also big thank you to simply people who are putting in the comments section, because you guys help compose the AMAs just as much as I do by providing these comments. And our first one comes to us from J.A. Baldwin, who says, "Hi Ned, I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts. My favorites are Trace Evidence and Criminally Listed. Do you listen to any?" Oh, absolutely. I listen to lots of true crime podcasts. Not as much as I have been in the past, because these days I definitely have leaned more toward reading, and I use a lot of articles as the source material for BBOR, sometimes books, but I listen to lots of true crime podcasts. In the past, I used to say that The First Degree was a podcast that I heavily recommended, hosted by Jack Vanek, Alexis Linkletter, and Billy Jensen. And the way I described it before was, it's like having that friend that you really don't like that much, but every time they call you up and say, "Hey, do you want to go get coffee?" You're like, "Yeah, I guess I could go." I said that in the past because The First Degree, and I've mentioned their material a lot, but The First Degree was a show that had these long-winded introductions. They would have like a 16 or 17-minute introduction where they're just talking casually, and I'm like, okay, this is actually some interesting stuff, but it's not what I was in the mood for when I'm listening to a true crime show. It's like, come on, people, get right to the story, will you? Get right to the true crime case. So what they did was they moved those long-winded introductions to the end of their episodes, and it's a segment called Killing Time now, where they just talk and have casual conversations. But I mean, for 16 minutes about what somebody ate for breakfast, I mean, I think it's a much better thing that they did, pushing it to the end of the show. Court Junkie, hosted by Jillian, was also a podcast that I really enjoyed. That one's a little bit lower energy than The First Degree. Another thing about reason why I started listening to The First Degree more is just their personalities. Jack, Alexis, and Billy are very large, and it's meant to attract you in that way. But with Court Junkie, which is hosted by Jillian, it's very fact-based, matter-of-fact. She seems very serious throughout it. I do not like any true crime podcast that is blending in humor. I know some people are big fans of those, but well, I shouldn't say anyone, but like the ones that talk about like murder stories, and they talk about cases of abuse, but then they're laughing about them. I do not like that. And there might be one exception to that I'll say in just a second. But the Serial Killer podcast, hosted by Thomas Viborg Thune, and although he did change his name after he got married, the only thing that I have to criticize about the Serial Killer podcast is it's hosted from this guy from Norway, and one time he put out a disclaimer or some type of announcement when he said, Excuse me, I have something to say. I am a Norwegian who studied in Scotland, so please don't make fun of my voice and tell me that I sound like Count Chocula. And I had a really solid laugh when I was listening to that. Then I was like, wait a second, Count Chocula? Count Chocula's a cereal. What does Count Chocula even sound like? Yeah, I don't know. That was weird. Maybe there's a Count Chocula cartoon in Norway or Scotland. No, he said not to make fun of his voice. But, anyway, there is actually another question here from J.A. Baldwin, but I will get to that one at the end because it's a two-part question. I would just follow up with one final thing. The true crime podcast that I absolutely would say is at the top of my list is Crime After Crime, which is hosted by Daniel Hallen and John Lorden, and they use lots of humor in that one. That would be the one exception, but they often don't talk about murder mysteries. They'll talk about things like bank heists gone wrong, or someone like who tried to do something really silly, like a guy tried to rob a store with a pair of hot dog tongs, and really bizarre cases. Sometimes, though, I think it even crosses the line a little bit, and it's almost like making fun of somebody's tragedy. But 99% of the time, it is mostly just about finding something in the true crime world that is a little bit lighter. And with Crime After Crime, which is available here on YouTube for free, you can hear two different stories, and the listeners get to vote about who told the better story. Now, this is giving away one of their secrets in one of the episodes, but they did this April Fool's Day prank when they talked about how they were changing the name of the show to Dime After Dime, and they're going to be a finance podcast. And then they had so many people write in saying that, like, hey, that's a really good idea. You guys have this show, Crime After Crime. You could have a whole brand, a whole network going on, Crime After Crime, Dime After Dime, which, would indeed talk about finance, who has the better financial strategy, and they could compare that. Or Wine After Wine, where people drink wine and then they tell a story where they're complaining about something in their personal life. I was like, holy crap, I would totally listen to that. Two people who I'm somewhat familiar with now. I've heard every single episode of Crime After Crime. It is a monthly podcast that comes out on YouTube, but it's available on all the podcast download things like iTunes and such. Yeah, I would love to listen to two people whom I'm familiar with drink wine and talk about anything, to be honest, at that point. Especially when it's not about the true crime world, then you can bring in humor and you can bring in personality. But and you guys know that I follow the Stones Unturned podcast, the Zodcast hosted by Drew Beeson, but I talk about those things a lot on the show. Okay, moving on to our next comment. This comes to us from Wacky Wayfarer, who has some topic recommendations. Suspected serial killers who have never been caught, Canadian true crime cases, the wave of scientists who've been murdered in bizarre ways. I'm going to zone in on one of those. The Canadian true crime cases is something I'd really like to expand upon, because you heard some things in this episode about the serial killer John Aykroyd. He operated in America in the state of Oregon, on Highway 20 in Oregon. Yeah, I think I just said that right. Sorry for being redundant. And just in case you didn't know, he was in Oregon. But it's so similar to the Highway of Tears in Canada, and I would love to do more about that. I did one episode on the murder of Amber Tuckerow. Amber Tuckerow was found murdered and buried in the ground. Her bodies were discovered by some hikers, but the reason why that's such a famous case is there's a voicemail that was saved that had been recorded of somebody who's giving her a ride in the car, or maybe a truck, and he's telling her all of these things like, where are we going? We're going to 50th Street in Edmonton, I think it was. It's been a while since I've looked into that one. And I did one episode on it, and it was one of those black box recordings that has like the little glowy effects around on the side, but it's still an old-fashioned black box recording, and I would love to do a longer, more extended episode on that has some imagery and a more solid presentation. But yes, that took place in Canada. Another example of someone preying on Indigenous women and preying on people who are not economically in a good place, so they resort to things like hitchhiking. Now, the next one that I would like to get to is something that I think is maybe going to come up rather frequently on this channel. And this one is from Chad Kelsey, who says, anything at all about the alleged Gacy accomplices that are still around, such as Michael Rossi. Last week, I did talk about John Wayne Gacy and his possible connections to a child sex ring, but because Chad has requested this a second time, I do want to read something. Last week on the channel, Mark Hewitt requested something about the Skylar Neese case, which is from my home state of West Virginia, but I had never heard of it before, so I did something that was taking an absolute fresh take on the subject. And that means that I'm going to read off this article here and going to respond to it, but I haven't pre-read the article or anything, and it's giving a pure first thought, whatever comes to mind reaction. And this is on John Wayne Gacy's Accomplices, and it was written by CBS 2 News, and it actually doesn't list the name of the person who wrote this one. But yes, this is CBS Channel 2 News. Attorneys believe that Gacy had accomplices. So, let's see what we can find. 2 Chicago lawyers have taken a fresh look at circumstances surrounding the disappearance of 3 victims of serial killer John Wayne Gacy, and they have concluded that he had at least one accomplice. One interjection here is many people have these theories about serial killers having some type of accomplice, or that they're out on some car trips. When they're going away and they're not at home, they're leaving with somebody, their family members, or at least noting that. That's not crazy. The 3 were found among the 29 victims whose bodies were buried in the crawl space of Gacy's home at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue in Norwood Park Township. And John Wayne Gacy famously murdered 33 people, but the other bodies that, in addition to this 29, were dumped in a river. Attorneys Stephen Becker and Bob Stevenson showed CBS 2 receipts that put Gacy out of town when 2 people ended up in his crawl space, disappeared. Well, I mean, my immediate response to that is, well, so what? The disappearance and murder are not the same thing. Wouldn't that just suggest that they went somewhere else first? Gacy was in Pittsburgh during the period in September 1977 when victim Robert Gilroy, age 18, disappeared, and when John Mowry, age 19, of Chicago, disappeared later in 1977. Gacy was at a job in Michigan, the attorneys told the Sun-Times. In a third case, a friend of one of the men who disappeared, Russell Nelson, 21, of Minneapolis, offered to work Nelson's brothers with Gacy. He offered to work them, like he asked other people to work for him. That's a really weird sentence, though. The Sun-Times had reported, that man's identity is being given to the police. The attorneys are also examining Gacy's own questions to the police when he was arrested. Who else do you have here in the station? Who else was involved? There were others involved, and he said his associates were involved directly. Well, I mean, I don't mean to throw a wet rag onto anybody's true crime theory, but I think a lot of people are going to say stuff like that to get out of trouble, or they're going to create some type of fall guy just so they can be blamed. One would-be victim, Jeff Ringel, lived to tell his story, but has since died. Ringel was drugged, tortured, and raped in Gacy's home and dumped in Lincoln Park, an offense for which Gacy was arrested, and he said that he thought somebody else was in Gacy's house when he was tortured. Now, we're going to jump ahead because the question was specifically about Michael Rossi. They claimed that one man, Michael Rossi, had socialized in the house with one victim, John Syke, SZYC, I hope I said that correctly, the night he was murdered. Gacy said he had a drink in the house but left, and then when he came back, the victim, Syke, was dead. But Gacy tried to convey the impression that he himself was not involved in the murders. He said he did not say anything because it wasn't any of my business and I stayed out of other people's business. they really began to notice that John Wayne Gacy did not appear to be extremely into any category. The famous line that you'll hear about him in true crime documentaries is, he didn't meet the diagnostic criteria for any mental disorder. That was something that is said in one of the most famous Gacy documentaries. About this here, I would not accept that John Wayne Gacy was telling the truth if he's being questioned by the police and he thinks he's about to be, well, sent to jail for life or death, maybe getting the death penalty, that he's not going to make something up. It's really quite similar to the story Don't Fuck with Cats, if you get to watch that documentary series on Netflix. Like, somebody gets arrested for murder, and then he blames the murder on some other person, which was most likely a fictional alias that he was just creating. But as far as being out of town, I think that would be a much bigger stretch to for the illegal teams to prove that an accomplice committed those murders. I mean, unless they could nail the absolute exact time of death. But who's to say that these serial killers do not work independently? I mean, like, sometimes they perhaps work independently, other times they actually do have other people that are aiding and abetting. Other people may be finding them victims. Some people might even be participating in the murders. And serial killer networks are not the most ridiculous thing in the world. They are actually somewhat plausible. Two people are frequenting the same gay bar, and they happen to learn about the actions of other people, and serial killers also work together. I mean, how many examples of that do you need? I mean, we could look at, like, Leonard Lake and Charles Ng, the Boneyard Killers. We could look at Dean Corll, who definitely had accomplices. He's known as the Candyman. People often have someone who does work with them. I don't think it's outrageous. I just think, as a first glance at the subject, I would not be I wouldn't rush to any conclusions about that. So the next one is, this one is from James O'Callahan, who says, "What do you think of the Lindsay Buziak murder mystery? I do not want to tell you. I do not want to tell you." All I can say about that one is Lindsay Buziak was a real estate agent who was murdered, and there's this whole setup about how somebody may have arranged a time to view one of the properties in which she was an agent for, and they murdered her at that time. The reason why I don't want to tell you is I've seen a couple interviews with her father, and he's just acts in a very weird way, and I really, really hope, and I really expect, is just his natural personality. He's probably just a very quirky and outgoing guy, but some things bothered me about that, and I'm not accusing him of anything. I'm not accusing him of anything other than being quirky, and what's my favorite saying? Being weird is not a crime. And there's some other ones here, though, that I can't comment on. The Braben killings, the Colonial Parkway murders, the Dan Zamlin case, I've not heard of that one. The Barry and Honey Sherman murder case, also haven't heard of one. The I-70 killer, now that one I can talk to you about. I can talk to you about the I-70 killer for hours if you mean Herb Baumeister, the I-70 strangler. Herb Baumeister was someone who fits into the serial killer network even better than John Wayne Gacy, because he was operating through gay bars. He would go to gay bars, he would try to lure men back to his house, he would show them these photos of this place where he lived, which is called Fox Hollow Farms, and then he was like, "Hey, I'm a landscape architect, I'm working on this property, look at all the things that I'm doing. Hey, you should come back and we should have some drinks there." And they do that, and then he would get the person a little bit more drunk, he would give them a tour of the house, and he would finish by the poolside for a very particular reason. He would then convince them to try sexual asphyxiation, and then he was like, "Hey, it's going to feel really good," but then they're going to pass away. He's not going to let go. And the reason why he wanted this done at the poolside is he had a camera installed, and he was filming these things. And when Herb Baumeister died, he drove into Canada, he ate a peanut butter sandwich, which was his favorite snack, he penned a 3-page suicide note, and he committed suicide, but he had taken all of these tapes with him, yet they were not found when he passed away. And most people believe that he disposed of them in the Great Lakes and got rid of them just so he wouldn't be incriminated, because his suicide note did not accept responsibility for the murders that had been committed. But Herb Baumeister's wife says, though, when he would go out, he's the I-70 strangler, right? He's going on these business trips and trying to meet people. He's also operating when she's out of town. What she said, though, is when he would go out, he didn't go alone. Doesn't that suggest accomplices? And yes, of course, people can have accomplices, but also, his wife refuses to accept that that's exactly what happened, because she's saying that serial killer, the I-70 strangler, Baumeister, that's not the Herb Baumeister I know. She's still in some denial about it. And there are 2 episodes that you can hear about Herb Baumeister here on this channel. One is called Indiana Serial Killer Herb Baumeister, and the other is called Serial Killer Herb Baumeister, the I-70 Strangler. Okay, though, moving on to our next comment. This one comes to us from Chris GP, who says, Ned, good to see you. I was wondering about the Sacramento freeway murders in 1986. Is there a possibility they are Zodiac related? And much like the Gacy accomplices, I'm going to read off an article that has not been previewed, and we're going to see what happens. This article, though, was sent to me recently by Richard Grinnell of ZodiacCiphers.com. If you don't read that website, I would highly recommend it. And let's just see what they say about these Sacramento freeway murders. But it begins, though, with a Zodiac image that says, "To the editor." And something was sent in to the San Francisco Chronicle. And we're going to the date of April 22nd. This article is written in 2018, so it says, April 22nd, 2018. Today is the 32nd anniversary of the callous double murder of Koi N. Se Chow and Choi Fao Se Lee, just north of Sacramento. This is a follow-up looking into greater detail with a potential Zodiac letter that was mailed to the San Francisco Chronicle and postmarked on May 6, 1986. The author of this letter may not be the murderer of the 2 unfortunate victims described within it, but without a doubt, this letter is detailing the murders of the Laotian couple Koi Ian Se Chow and Choi Fao Se Lee. The couple left their residence in Dorman Avenue, Yuba City, approximately 39 miles north of Sacramento, for the 195-mile journey to Merced County, not sure about that one, to visit their son in the hospital. Later that day, on April 22nd, 1986, they would make the exhausting 3-hour journey back home, or so they thought. Somebody would change these plans as they approached the interchange on Highway 99 and Interstate 5 in Sacramento, just north of the city. For whatever reason, the pair decided to pull over onto the hard shoulder of the freeway, a decision that would ultimately prove deadly. A merciless killer approached the vehicle and unloaded 15 bullets into the driver's side window of the car, blowing out both front windows in a relentless barrage of gunfire. Small caliber shell casings were strewn between and beside the vehicle. Koi and Se Chow and Choi Fao Se Lee were left with no chance of survival at the hands of the brutal killer. And they were driving a 1983 Mercury make. The couple were only 45 to 50 minutes away from their home location during their 3-hour, 10-minute journey, which may indicate that they decided to take a rest momentarily, or were possibly signaled to the side of the freeway by a trailing motorist, not dissimilar to the tactic employed in the abduction of Kathleen Johns on March 22, 1970. And both of these are occurring in the springtime, may I note. The killers may have approached from the rear of Koi and Se Chow and Choi Fao Se Lee's vehicle in a fashion of the Modesto attack, or in the case of Darlene Ferrin and Mike Peugeot at Blue Rock Springs, where the killer approached the passenger side of the vehicle. And I was also talking about that with the things I said recently about Lake Herman Road, that the Zodiac killer may have approached the passenger side of the car first at Lake Herman Road. Definitely if the Zodiac had parked the car where it is believed, and also I mean, some people believe that he could have walked around and shot David Faraday first, or just began firing at Betty Lou Jensen first, because the Zodiac would have been on the passenger side of the car, but it would be very impractical to do that. Instantly, I did think of the Kathleen Johns incident, because that's the whole thing about, hey, your wheel's loose, you gotta pull over, and that does stand out, but the Kathleen Johns incident is an unconfirmed Zodiac crime. I personally do not believe it was Zodiac related. The double murder of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen was also perpetrated by a killer approaching the victim's vehicle. Alright, though. Now let's be very, very clear. And not even anything about this article, but about the actual event that took place. Somebody was murdered along the side of the road. Now, we're going to need a lot more than that to connect this to the Zodiac Killer. And you heard the introduction to this article. What appears to be bigger in the mind of Richard, or the person who wrote this, is that maybe someone wrote a letter taking credit for this. However, did they actually do it? It's definitely in the Zodiac Killer's wheelhouse. I mean, I can say that much. But let's keep reading. A short time after the murders, a hitchhiker flagged down an East Nicholas patrol officer and informed him of the accident at said location. If the killer was the hitchhiker, then this mystery man likely drove his vehicle north to East Nicholas and informed the highway patrol officer of the crash in absence of his vehicle. Relying on this information, the officer with his vehicle in tow may not have been the wisest choice. The claim of being a hitchhiker separates him from his vehicle and distances himself from the yet-to-be-discovered double murder, which he described as an accident, likely to avoid being dragged in deeper. This is not unlike the phone call possibly received after the Lake Herman Road double murder. Bidu and his partner had served a warrant on a Lake Herman Road cabin on December 20th, 1968, and were on their way to deposit some marijuana in the police department's evidence locker when they were dispatched back to Lake Herman Road. Initially, they were told a woman was lying outside the car, and they thought they were being sent to a crash. Police at first speculated that it might have been a crank call, but the officers headed back north. But when they arrived, Bidu realized it was no crank call. It was a car accident. It was not a car accident. It was a crime scene. It was a sinister crime scene. Was the Zodiac Killer employing a similar tactic on April 22nd, 1986, especially considering that this time he was face-to-face with a highway patrol officer and didn't want to be detained? Well, that would also be something similar to talking to police officers after the Stein shooting, or just walking in the vicinity of other people. Whether this officer took any details from the hitchhiker or gave a description is unknown, but the author of the 1986 letter may have referenced this encounter 2 weeks later. I mean, you would really have to wonder. This definitely does seem like everything that the Zodiac Killer would be capable of. Sneaking up on people, firing some gunshots, throwing these false leads, absolutely. But, we would still need a little bit more than that. The Zodiac Killer was certainly keen on informing the police of his murders, as demonstrated by his phone calls after Blue Rock Springs and Lake Berryessa, or, after the, Stein shooting, mailing in a piece of the bloody shirt. But it doesn't appear that there were any trophies taken from this one as of yet. On April 24th, 1986, the Santa Cruz Sentinel reported on these crimes. The man and woman found in the car were shot to death, parked just north of Sacramento, and have been identified as a refugee from Laos and a friend who lived in Yuba City. They were identified Wednesday as Choi Fao Se Lee and Koyin Se Chow. Their bodies were found Tuesday at the junction of Interstate 5. Just one thought came to mind. I've read these names so many times. The Zodiac Killer only targeted Caucasian people, not Asian people. Someone pointed that out recently to me, and I mean, I know that's not the earth-shattering news or anything, but they're like, all the Zodiac Killer's victims were white/Caucasian. I don't think that was planned by the Zodiac Killer. I think that those were just the victims who were opportunistic, but that's just a difference that I would want to note. The victim's 4 children and 10-month-old grandchildren have been placed in the Sutter County Children's Protective Services. They also had 3 grown children. There is still no known motive for the slayings. They may have been the victims of a random killer. The hitchhiker killer is still being sought. Oh, and sure, it could be a different maniac. Doesn't have to be the Zodiac Killer, right? But, here is one from something that was written into a letter that, the Zodiac tries to use to connect himself to this. This is the Zodiac speaking. I am still out here and crack-proof. I want to know about my latest slaves that I have collected about 2 weeks ago up in Sacramento. I will give you a clue to help you with the mystery. They were killed by a freeway. The blue meanies almost caught me. The body count is growing now, 100 plus, all over the state of California, and I guess Nevada. I think it says N-A, must be a Nevada, right? Really, it looks more like C-E-N-A. I guess it's C-A-N-A. Well, 100 plus. If I can take a very, very direct, hard, and brutal stance, even if the Zodiac Killer murdered many people, murdered 37 people, I don't believe the Zodiac Killer actually killed 100 people, 100 plus. No way. It's inconceivable, to be honest. Yes, I mean, there are enough days in the year, but not really. I don't think the Zodiac murdered more than 100 people. And they were killed by a freeway? What about all the stuff the Zodiac Killer used to talk about, such as, I will state some facts that only I and the police know, or how about, here's a piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt. Where's that stuff? They were killed by a freeway. And I would never do this. I'm not going to write in letters taking credit for murders that I didn't commit, but I'm so tempted to right now, and I'm going to say, oh yeah, well, there are two people that are over there by the road. Here's a hint for you. It's not a road, it's a street. That pushes us away from genuine Zodiac activity, but the handwriting on the letter is spot on. All right, well, thank you to everybody who has listened to this, and thank you to everyone who left in these questions. So that's Sacramento freeway murders. We can definitely look more into that in the future, and thank you to everyone who has contributed something to this channel. And if your question wasn't asked yet, maybe it'll be asked next time, but that is all for me now. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com, and you can also get me on the DMs at Instagram, and in the DMs on Instagram, something like that. And you can follow the show on Facebook. There's a link in the description box to that, as well as links to the Teespring page. I will see you on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.